My parents were missionaries starting with the World War II era in Peru for 42 years. And so I was born there. My mother, we had no television. We had no technology of any kind that I can remember. I don't even remember having a radio. So my mother read us classics all the time. She told me to read Dracula. My mother, who was a very conservative Christian, she said it's a great Christian book. And it is, and I teach it now. I hate self-promotion. I cannot bear self-promotion in the Christian world in the way. There is a way in which people will bring in their connections, or they will, what do they call that? Network. And they do it in these ways that it feels icky. That's the only way to me. I can't do that.
In this episode of the Wayfaring Stranger podcast, I sit down with Dr. Rosalie de Rosset, whose 6 decades of teaching at Moody Bible Institute have given her unique insight into the intersection of literature, faith, and the spiritual climate of the church at large. In this conversation, we dive more into de Rosset's background growing up as a missionary kid and how her mother from a young age taught her how to read and appreciate the literary classics. Dr. de Rosset shares candid thoughts about the commodification of ministry, the loss of dignity in our digital age, and how literature has shaped her understanding of both God and human nature. I hope you enjoy this episode.
My parents were missionaries starting with the World War II era in Peru for 42 years. And so I was born there in the 40s. And my mother, we had no television. We had no technology of any kind that I can remember. I don't even remember having a radio. Well, we had the reel-to-reel tapes. So my mother read us classics all the time, and from the time we were tiny. And we were homeschooled, and it was a classic curriculum. And we were homeschooled because we had to. The schools were at a different time of the year because of the season difference, and they were mainly Catholic and private in ways that we could not attend. So I just grew up on the classics. I was reading them by the time I was 6 or 7.
What are some of those memories?
The ones I remember are David Copperfield. I remember Ivanhoe. Having contests with my brother to see who would finish first. She raised us on things like Robin Hood and his merry men, King Arthur and his knights. Pilgrim's Progress was huge in our home.
Yeah.
And then the Heidi books, starting with the young adult and moving up. So a lot of Dickens. I don't remember much Shakespeare, and just the classics, Robinson Crusoe, the classics that came with the curriculum too. And then I just steadily did it. I just always loved it.
It was your mother schooling you mainly?
Yeah.
Where did she get that from? Is that how she was raised?
Well, she would have been now about 108 or 9. So she was growing up at a time when even in the schools they really did read so much more seriously as small children. It was a whole different system. And her father, who was not a college graduate, had a library better than most college graduates, theological library and literary library. And he just read, and he bought these books, and they were poor. Buy these books, and he'd put his name and how much he paid for it inside the books. And they were wonderful books. She just always had a love for it. I think she had a couple of teachers in grammar school that got her started. She was more of a reader than her sisters, as I think about it.
And your father, too?
My father was not so much a reader. He came to the Lord late, but he learned to love it. And I think actually by today's standards, he probably was a reader. And they even liked things like the old G. Campbell Morgan, William Barclay commentaries, things that had literary allusion all the way through them. Yeah.
Interesting. And so did she ever tie in her love of literature or her knowledge of literature with her faith or the gospel in any ways that was memorable to you?
She taught Pilgrim's Progress to young children in Sunday school and preschool when they were tiny, 2 or 3 years old, and she'd make it 3-dimensional. Oh, yes, she would read these things with great animation. And I remember about King Arthur and his knights, the deeds of the good knights and the deeds of the bad knights. I never knew about Guinevere and what happened, but I found out later. And Robin Hood and his merry men was just a lark. I think she actually, without realizing it, was saying that life is supposed to be full of delight. She told me to read Dracula. My mother, who was a very conservative Christian, she said it's a great Christian book. And it is, and I teach it now. They seem to be side by side. It's like she didn't have to make these artificial junctures. First of all, she loved the Old Testament, and Scripture was fascinating. The Old Testament was fascinating, more fascinating when I was a child than the New Testament, not because they didn't teach that too, but it's these great narratives that are so marvelous. And so I never thought about a bifurcation between the two. It's sort of like you read because you're supposed to read well, and it was so much fun. And there was even no should or ought. We did read well. We just did. It was part of what constructs the texture of life.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I wasn't raised as much with what would you say, the bifurcation of literature. We definitely read outside of the faith. I would say that the thing in my generation, I grew up with a lot of people who I would show them music and they'd never heard it before because they grew up with the bifurcation of music, of we only listen to Christian music in the house. I didn't grow up that way. My dad and I, on the way to school, would listen to James Brown or whatever, Led Zeppelin.
I sort of like that.
Yeah. And just different stuff. And but he was always careful about what songs he was showing me and which ones he wasn't, which I found out later because then I listened. I was like, I never heard this part before. But it is unexpected that I just wouldn't expect that from a missionary family per se. I mean, I would expect you to read missionary biographies and,
and we did.
Yeah. And Fox's Book of Martyrs and stuff like that.
And we did.
Right.
I read Fox's Book of Martyrs when I was a small child, which is not exactly a good idea because there were some very vivid scenes in there. She just had a tremendous sense of the classic and great story. But I think she would have been going to high school in the 20s. And I just think it was a whole different thing then. And then she went to college and loved it too. I think she majored in English. So,
So what else was your childhood like? I mean, you're on the mission field, you're being homeschooled. What was your experience?
We were utterly involved with the people in our church. So we worked among the poorest of the poor, but those people were our friends. We did everything together. We had church Sunday afternoon because nobody had refrigerators at that time, so they had to shop in the morning, Sunday afternoon and Sunday night, Wednesday night and Friday night.
This was where again?
Peru.
Okay.
Coastal Peru. And so the people, I mean, they were very poor, but we had, I remember, outdoor picnics where they'd take a goat and cook every part of it. And I can remember, church was fun because these were your friends. These were the people you worshiped with. These were the people you played with on weekends. I went into the people's houses, which were mud brick homes with nothing. And I just grew up mixed. It wasn't the kind of missionary thing. Later on, I realized that my parents didn't have much themselves. We always had indoor plumbing, and we had hot water once a week, and we had electricity from 6 o'clock at night till maybe 5 in the morning. Later, we had more. But so we had a little bit more comfortable so that people could come and get some respite at our home. But there was a complete mixing. We weren't in a compound. We weren't in a social class above, the way I've often seen, in South America particularly. So we just grew up learning Spanish, knowing Spanish. I went to market. My father did all the buying in the market, and I went to market with him. We went to the beach because we were on the ocean. My mother would visit the people carrying a big stick because there were wild dogs. Everything was that way. There were people in and out of our home all the time.
How many siblings?
3, 2 brothers and a sister.
And where were you in the lineup?
I was 3, number 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you all get along?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, my younger brother and I, we were a little contentious, but yes, we did. We love each other. My one brother died 3 years ago, but we love each other very, very much to this day.
So still 3 of you?
Yeah. There are 3 of us. Yeah. Yeah.
So how long were you on the field in Peru?
I was there till I was almost 13. And
Okay.
then my parents felt that we needed to go home for high school. So I came home for high school and lived with my grandmother.
So they would send you off as you got to the age of high school?
Yeah. My sister went home a little too young, and that my mother really felt that deeply. But I went home at 13. My other brother stayed on one of the furloughs. He was probably 16. And my younger brother went home at about 14, lived with an uncle.
And where did you go home to?
Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh. Butler County. of the famous assassination attempt. That's 3 miles from my home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you grow up bilingual?
Yeah. Oh, completely. Yeah.
And do you still have it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We're all bilingual. My younger brother has just retired from 7 years at Berea College in Spanish literature and Spanish. He talks like a native, like real Spain Spanish. But yeah.
Can you read novels in Spanish?
I could.
Yeah.
It would be painstaking a little bit.
Yeah.
But yes, I have, but I don't do it regularly. It probably would help me to at least read the Bible more regularly in Spanish. But there's so much ways to speak Spanish in the city.
Oh, for sure.
And I've forgotten words, but it always surprises people. But I have the accent. Yeah.
And so what was that like? You grew up your whole life in Peru, and then how was that culture shock?
You know, I have a really big personality. So when I came to the States for high school, I was very overweight. I didn't have any clothes particularly. I had no idea how bad it was. I just was kind of ebullient. And so I made my way, and it was fine. I had a great time in high school.
For those who don't know what word you just said, including myself.
Full of optimism and energy.
Yeah.
I think that's what it means,
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was okay. I think it's just because of who I am.
Yeah.
When I look back, probably today it would never work. It was a more forgiving time then.
Was this the 60s?
Yes. Yeah. I was
Okay.
in high school and college from 61 to 69. Yeah.
That's also our whole country was changing.
Our whole country was changing, yeah.
That's
But I
like-
was at a Christian school, and I missed the Vietnam War and had to recover it later because we couldn't watch TV or anything in those years. It was a conservative. It's not that conservative now, but it
No.
was at the time.
Yeah, that's a crazy time to be growing up. I mean, you
Yeah.
got
Oh, it was.
Beatlemania,
You do the hippie thing, Woodstock.
Woodstock, and then, like you said, the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and I was terribly interested in the Vietnam War later and read everything I could get my hands on.
And just like the universities changing a lot during that.
I think that's when they became going very left.
Yeah. Kind of the beginnings of what we have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The marches on Washington, the opposition to war,
Civil rights.
Civil rights.
Yeah.
It was all. I lived in the time when my parents were doing deputation work in the South. I can remember no blacks allowed, separate drinking fountains,
Yeah.
all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything. The movies were changing,
Yeah.
music. Yeah, it's crazy.
Beginning of the rock revolution, really.
Yeah.
It started with Elvis a little bit.
And the Beatles took it from
And
there.
the Beatles took it. I can remember when the Beatles did it in 1964.
Yeah.
I had a friend that was sure she was going to marry Ringo Starr.
Wow.
She was serious. Yeah.
Yeah, that time, it makes me realize I feel like not that much has changed since then. Like, I feel like a lot of things that were set in motion then, things haven't changed by an order of magnitude apart from technology, but...
Except that they're much darker now. So the forms are... the way I felt like it is now, it's today, there's not as much soul in it as there was then. I'm not defending the movements. There were very bad movements. But there was an energy that was authentically dark. And now I feel like it's often mimicry. And it doesn't come from a deep place. I could be wrong, but I feel that way sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like people pick up the torch whether they know what they're doing or not.
Sure. That makes sense. So when did Christ become a reality in your life?
I was converted under my father when I was only 6. I remember the night. I remember where. But when it really happened was in college in my second year. I fell into a very deep depression. And my grades kind of went down, and I was kind of in despair. I don't think I even remember the particulars of what that was about because I'm not a depressed type. But it was very, very deep. And I came home that summer. Maybe it was my junior year. And I remember it being so dark, and I went upstairs, and I said to the Lord, I said, you have got to lift this. This is too dark for me to bear. And I got up from praying, and it was completely different. I don't have any other experience quite that transformative in terms of shoving me into something different. I've had many experiences with the Lord since they confirm and deepen my walk with him to the point where I feel very stable. But I got up and I felt like the skies looked bluer and the grass looked greener, and I was delivered completely from that depression. And I've never had one quite like that again. It was sort of unformed. But then every decade of my life, and I've been at Moody since I was 21, so I've been here, I'm entering my 56th year. So all of my growing up, everything has been while working at Moody and living in Chicago. And so you go through the natural things in your 20s, in your 30s, which are times when you have this tremendous desire to get married and wonder if you will or you won't, and go through the angst of that not happening. And then in my 40s, kind of a little period of bitterness. I had a choice to do it, did not have the feeling I should. And then kind of growing into the 50s and feeling a sense of purpose and design in my life and seeing the beauty of the gift of my teaching, of what I had been given. And I've always been very close to a lot of students. And, and since then, just the real stability in the Lord of thinking I would not want to be alive except for Jesus Christ, that this has been good.
Yeah.
He has given me a great deal. His mercy has been large, and everybody suffers.
Do you remember what that depression felt like? Was it in isolation?
It was anger.
Anger, okay.
I had a lot of anger. Yeah, I had a lot of anger over things not going the way I thought they should be. Yeah.
Do you struggle with anger still?
I struggle with a sense of justice. So my anger now is against people not seeing truth or being so twisted in their notions from my perspective, and over wokeness invading institutions and churches. And so that's the kind of anger I have now. Yeah, I'm not an angry person. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically just like against darkness and things that you feel like are taking advantage of people.
And I hate triviality, not triviality. I can small talk, but I hate self-promotion. I cannot bear self-promotion in the Christian world in the way people do not take a stand and they are so self-promoting.
Can you
they
tell
always
me
give their resumes.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about that? How does that come out?
I have many, many faults. One of them is not that I need to be famous or I need to get ahead. So I can't do the brochure thing, the picture thing. I mean, I have stuff I've had to do for conferences, but there is a way in which people will bring in their connections, or they will, what do they call that? Network. And they do it in these ways that it's probably okay, but it feels icky. That's the only way to me. I can't do that. I cannot compromise certain things about myself to get to this place. I can't talk the talk. I can't manage the image. And it is a kind of a talk. It's a subtext. Always when you see, there are some people that genuinely escape it and manage, but I can't do that. It's probably my worst fault and my greatest virtue. I think both things are true.
Yeah, I bring up my grandfather a lot because he was very much like that. He's a fine artist, and but if he didn't have my grandmother, I don't think he would have been able to do it as a career because she had to promote him and do all the brochures and talk up his art. He would never do that. He'd be like, whatever,
Yeah.
Take it for $50. Like,
yes, I have that tendency.
And she'd be like, no, what are you doing? And she'd be like, I'm sorry, actually that's $300, And
That's great.
She was all about preserving his value, and they were believers, they were missionaries first. But his thing too, when he set off in ministry when he was a teenager, was his two brothers. This was Northern Canada back in the 40s, and they're never going to ask for money, and they're never going to ask for meetings because they were evangelists and singers as well. So one of them was a preacher, and the other two did the music, and they traveled together. They actually came to Moody back when my grandfather was 17 or 18, so that would have been 1948.
Wow.
And he was up in, I think it's Kroll, right?
Yes.
He was up there in the old radio studio.
Is that right? Yeah.
And I didn't know that. I didn't put it together until I was actually here, because he never told me to go to Moody or even really brought it up until I brought it up that I'm applying. He's like, oh, I was there, you know?
Oh, my goodness. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And so, but that was their thing, is like, if we ever run out of places to go, people aren't inviting us, you know, then, or we run out of money, we'll just come home. Never happened. So.
Never have seen, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. My grandfather, who had 6 children, lived on what people put in a box at the back of the church. He had no salary. I'm not telling you that that's the way to do it. That's just the way. That's what I'm used to. And my parents were very self-sacrificial missionaries and never had much. And when they did have anything, gave away a lot of it. And I'm just not used to that. I live way below my means.
Yeah.
It's just a different kind of look. And I can't do that song and dance kind of. I've never had a speaking fee. It's whatever you give me. Yeah.
Yeah, because you speak a lot, right?
I used to. You age out of speaking.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You age out.
Is that just because you're not teaching, or?
No. It's because they don't want older people. They want a young image.
That makes sense. I guess everything's Instagram
Everything,
now.
yeah. Everything is the way. Yeah. But I still do some, and enough. I don't want to do more than I do.
Well, I'll tell you about my thought, which you'd probably like this thought because it sounds like you're more. I totally agree with you. It's very hard for me to even do. I feel like it's very easy for me to promote the podcast because I'm promoting people in particular.
I understand that.
It would be easy for me to share an episode where we're talking because I'm talking about you.
Yeah.
But if it was just me talking and it was just like a solo podcast where I'm going through topics, it would be hard for me to promote that.
That's interesting. Well, then you have the same kind of instinct. Yeah. It feels embarrassing. It feels inappropriate.
Yeah. And then you have people who do it and you're just like, eh.
I don't like it.
No.
I don't like it. There are many conferences I've been a speaker at that I just swallow hard.
And I think also, like when I started this endeavor, 6 or 7 months ago, people would be like, "Oh, I'll listen to it," and I'm like, if you want to, it's not like, for instance, like if I wrote a book like you have, like it's like if you want to, like
that's way
I don't want you to support it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
like,
exactly right.
That was my thing with Christian film, is like, churches would buy out whole theaters to go support the film. I'm like, go see it if you want to see it. Like, that's how I feel about stuff. It's like, I don't want anyone to feel compelled to listen or read or do anything about anything I've made, only if I think it, and I would recommend an episode if I thought it was pertinent or helpful to somebody's, something they're interested in. Not because I don't need numbers from people who, if you want to, please, that's
I totally understand that.
So, okay, here's a question. Kind of a follow-up from last time, too. I actually asked Dr. Sauer this for fun because I saw him last week.
Oh, did you?
I asked him.
How is he?
He's doing well.
Yeah.
He and Sue were there, and they just got back from a little trip in Colorado. He's just...
Did you see him here?
No, I rented a place in Wheaton because last time they came all the way in here at 8 a.m. and I just felt bad because it's so long,
Yeah.
And so I had them over there in Geneva, which is a little closer.
Yes.
But they're doing well, and I'm just amazed by, he was on the phone like 2 or 3 times before and after with like young men that he's discipling.
He's amazing.
Yeah. And I asked him about that because I was like, not everyone's, like, if you existed in my church, everyone would want to be discipled by you. But like, not everyone's so open about it like he is. He really sacrifices his time
Always did.
So that's impressive to me. And it's something that I honestly, even at my age, I'm only 30, but there's younger people in my church I could probably be pouring into as well,
Oh, of course.
And so, but anyway, I bring that up to say, I asked him about, I just wanted to throw this quote at him that you said to see what he would say. So you said something about evangelicals are better at truth and goodness than about beauty. What do you mean by that?
And I actually think they're better at truth than the other two. Truth, they're good at dogma, or some churches are good at dogma, but even the kind of lower churches that aren't maybe expository preachers, they're much more concerned about getting the point across, whatever point they think needs to be made, whether that's salvation text or Jesus or a point. And then in the higher churches, and they're very interested in theological truth or biblical truth, unadorned. And what's important to them is their perceived notion of goodness. Now, that changes because goodness is thinned out a great deal. We don't have strong boundaries a lot of times between darkness and light anymore. It's very much, blurred. Beauty is the adornment of truth so that it can be received. Literature takes truth and puts it into a story so you can receive that without a direct finger pointing. It's the engagement of the person. It's the delight. It's the enthralled. When we're enthralled, we learn better. We take in. If I'm enthralled, the reason so many people can't follow Christ is they've never seen him. He's the guy that walks around in a white robe with a blue towel over his hand and with wavy hair, great hair, always great hair. And as one of my students said, a guy that would never date me.
Yeah.
He's so removed. And if you continue to see Christ that way, how can you obey a person like that? That's why there is so little obedience, because we haven't seen Christ. And we have not seen the narratives of Scripture in ways that absolutely engage. Years ago in 95, I think, Tracy wrote a book called Madman, which is part of my Monster Lit course, and also Images of Christ. And in it, she made the madman of the Gerasenes live. And the evil was darker and more impossible than we could have ever thought. And the deliverance was more beautiful than we could have ever thought. Christ came alive. And so I did my PhD on the language of preaching, and in a secular environment. A great preacher is somebody that knows exactly how to illustrate, or at least he finds a way to make a metaphor from real life or a practical way of engagement with the audience while communicating the text in a fresh way that is memorable. I have a tremendous preacher. I don't belong to the church, I just attend, but he's a tremendous preacher. And he is able in 25 minutes to do things with the text that are never strident, always compelling, always well illustrated, done with humility, and with a sense of urgency. And it's amazing. I write down every word. I've got notebooks filled. And I've known 3 or 4 other preachers like that in my life. And it's always amazing to see. And when I preach or when I speak, I write it out in manuscripts so that I can see it, so that the language becomes as engaging as it can while still being able to be human. And it makes a difference. It makes a difference. And it makes a difference to me as I speak it.
Yeah. Yeah, to keep your own interest in what you're saying.
Yeah. If I'm bored, I can't speak.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Can't remember either.
No.
Yeah.
So beauty, we're living in a really ugly culture, and we need to present people with beauty, and it's even the beauty of your home. And I don't mean by that you have to spend a lot of money, but I say to my students, you really do need to make your bed. If you don't make your bed, you're a slob. 40% of people don't make their beds. It takes a minute and a half. It changes your sense of order. You live an ordered life. You need to do the dishes. You need to have fresh flowers occasionally. There needs to be softness. We don't even know how the aesthetic sense is taking us and what it does for our spirits. But we give a gospel that's true, but not very interesting.
Yeah, and how can that be, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not taught.
I want to talk to Neely at some point about that, because he had one of my other guests, one of those clips that really got a lot of traction was he was quoting Neely, actually. He was a student a few years before me. He's a poet now. And he said, how can you make something as wonderful as the gospel boring? And that's a Neely quote. And I don't know how to put this, but sometimes I hear people talking about the gospel, and I'm like, sometimes I feel like they're faking interest in what they're talking about. Like, I feel like they're saying, isn't this wonderful? But the way they talk about other things that they really think are wonderful is
They don't-
way different. Like
They don't tell you they're wonderful. They say the pizza had sausage infused into the crust.
they just tell you something about it. What they love about
They
it.
show it. They don't
Yeah.
tell.
It's specific.
Otherwise, you're just working yourself into conviction that you don't have. I cannot preach something I'm not interested in.
That thing that you just mentioned, working yourself into conviction you don't have, is I think a scary kind of thing that exists. And I've noticed it in my own life at times where I look back at different journals I had or, things I would say. I'm like, I don't even know what I was saying. You know what I mean? Was it true? Yes. Do I still think it's true? But I wasn't there yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
I didn't wrestle with that before I said it. And I should have. I think that's actually why it's interesting to talk to you, because I think your opinions oftentimes are things that you have wrestled with
Oh,
for years.
yeah. I mean, I've been at Moody for 56 years. So I've heard a lot of chapels, spiritual emphasis weeks, founders weeks, ad infinitum, sometimes ad nauseum. And it's helped me to discern what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a slick time we're in.
How do you mean?
There's a code, it's leather jackets, worn jeans. I don't know. There's just we probably always had a code, but I can remember the Founders Weeks where we had 3 preachers in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, went for 7 days, including a big bash on Sunday afternoons, somewhere like the Rosemont Horizon. Before that, it was in Torrey Gray or Moody Church. All these preachers were indistinguishable. They wore blue suits, not even black, I don't think. They were bald, aging, little paunchy, but when they opened their mouths, they were not indistinguishable. So you knew what they were. They stayed in people's homes. They didn't stay at fancy hotels. They didn't own second homes. I think money itself has done some of the damage. I am not a person who believes in teaching pastors. And I guess I'm old enough, I don't care what anybody thinks about this, but a teaching pastor that shows up to teach and never spends any time with his congregation is counter-biblical. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Preachers how will they know who to preach to unless they spend time with the people? Even as a speaker on a low echelon of speaking, I never made it to the big ranks. I didn't even try. But I can remember going a couple places that were big deal places. And so they'd say, "What do you want in your room?" I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Oh, we have speakers all the time that say they want certain kind of sheets, certain kind of drinks, flowers." I said, in Christendom? And they said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "I don't want anything. I want a bed.
Yeah.
And I'd like a bath with the room."
Yeah.
I think that money itself has done the damage, and there is a social class among evangelicals.
Well, yeah.
I'm being very hard on it now.
Well, I mean, I would say
You can push back.
no. I'm not disagreeing. I think there's something very unique about American Christianity because it's profitable.
It's profitable. The Lord is my product, I shall not want.
Yeah.
I heard that once. It's not original with me.
Well, because I think, and I talked to Quiggle about this when I talked to him a few months ago, but the state church made it so that didn't really exist. But when you stopped having a state church in the U.S., now everyone has to market themselves, in a way.
That's what I can't do, market myself. That's
Yeah.
the word, yeah.
Right. But the thing I will say, and this is actually something Tim Keller said, I don't think he wrote his first book until he was in his 50s. And he probably could have, although he was a pastor, not a teaching pastor. So, he spent 9 or 11 years in Hopewell, Virginia, which is not his thing. He took on watching American football to bond with the people of that congregation, and just like I read this in his biography, but he took on how to interact with these people who aren't book readers, who aren't intellectuals and don't have his interests, and he did it. And he was a pastor, and then he went to New York and planted a church, which he didn't want to do, even though you're like, well, it fits you perfectly. You know how to,
Pull this off.
yeah, well, you know how to speak the faith in an urban context, but he did not want to go there. And it just makes so much sense in hindsight. But I say that to say, as he got older, he wrote a lot of books. And he said he was so thankful that, because there's a pressure now, especially if you have a quote unquote successful and growing church, to start writing books.
I'm sure that's true.
And he's like, I'm so glad I didn't write a book in my 30s.
Good for him. Well, what I think about Tim Keller is that I once went to New York, the only time in my many years that I went to New York, and stayed for the weekend, and knew he had a church that met at Hunter Auditorium, which was near the hotel where I was. And he had 2 other locations too he could have gone to. And he would never announce where he was going to be.
Yeah, I heard that.
Because he didn't want people following him around. Well, I happened to go to Hunter, and he was there that day. And he was just this obscure little figure. And he got up, and he's very inauspicious, and then he talks. And I think God blessed it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's always those who want it less are the ones who should have it, right? In a sense.
Yeah.
I wanted to also kind of revisit something else you said last time. You said literature has kept me from boredom. It straightened out my life. It gave me dignity. It pointed out my sins. It gave me the power, the beauty of language. And can you explain to me the dignity part of how literature...
Well, I wrote a whole book on it, of course.
Yes.
Dignity is this concept we almost never hear about. You hear about dignified dying, and that usually means euthanasia. You know, we should be able to be allow ourselves to die if we don't like where we are. Dignity is seeing yourself as Christ sees you, and it would change the way we dress a lot more. If women would behave differently. We would do things very differently with media if we could see ourselves as people who are whole because we've been whole by Christ. And so when I say reading gave me dignity, I was provided with these wonderful role models because of the kind of books my mother gave, whether they're the Austens or the Brontes, particularly the Brontes, particularly Jane Eyre, that gave you this feeling of wanting to have a sense of voice that had nothing to do with your looks, your dress, but with who you were as a character and a soul. The way you talked, the way you asserted yourself, assert is the wrong word, the way you held yourself with constraint, dignity, and wisdom. And I'm very spontaneous, so I don't see myself as totally dignified, but I do know who I am and what I believe. And I know who I am before Christ. It's taken many, many years, but it changes everything. We're not doing things imitatively. We're not doing things to fill some kind of hole that needs affirmation inside of us. We're not proving something. And one of the things that technology has done so much damage to the human spirit is it's taken our dignity because it's made us robotic, and it's made us always looking down, and it's made us married to something outside of ourselves. The person that doesn't do it is the different one, and everybody looks at them like there's something wrong with them. They will not be held by the things that everybody else is doing. But reading has really done that to me. I mean, it's like a thing in my head. You know, it goes along with Scripture. It affirms Christ's behavior toward women. It affirms the best books that I've read.
Yeah. It makes me think of the titles that we're told, you know, you're an ambassador of Christ. You're a son and daughter.
You're a son and daughter of
Royal
Christ.
priesthood.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't think of yourself that way and do the things that are indiscriminate and basically that are promoted
are
nowadays.
embarrassing.
Really. They
And
are.
inappropriate, and yet we don't even see them as inappropriate anymore because we have so lost sight of it. And frankly, because the parental model is not there. There's been a thinning out through the generations.
There was something I was thinking as you were saying that. How do you ever see young men or women, and how can you tell whether they are carrying themselves with dignity or not?
Oh, you really almost can tell very quickly. They just have a sense of voice. They have a sense of sureness about who they are. They don't fall into certain traps. In a very wonderful development in the last couple of years, for some reason, there have been groups of young men in my classes that have wanted to come to my house for dinner or to talk or to watch. And I've been very surprised by it because I'm a much, much older woman, but it's like they needed an older woman. It's like the golden grandmother thing, is voice. And they come and they just want to talk, and they sit at my table, and they show up, and they've almost all graduated now. But they're all very good-looking guys. They're very funny. They hold each other accountable for pornography. A bunch of them have gotten flip phones.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I almost never saw a phone while any of them were there. Their dignity was incredible, and the way they dated was so refreshing. And I can think especially of 2 or 3 of them. It's been a wonderful thing. Women and men need a lot of help in this regard because nobody's talking about it. And I'm very concerned about it.
Yeah, what it makes me think of also is I think a lot of the character traits that you put with dignity could wrongly be attributed to pride or arrogance. I think there's a false humility in Christianity sometimes in some circles that you have to be very unsure about yourself and kind of apologizing. Or you know what I mean?
Oh, I know what you mean. I don't think it's dignity is not poise, but it includes poise. It's not good looks. It can include it, but I always give the example of Princess Diana and Mother Teresa. Nobody would have ever described Mother Teresa as beautiful, poised, or any of it, but she was utterly dignified. When she talked, everybody listened. You have Princess Diana, one of the most beautiful women in the world, most well-known, poised, well-dressed, ended her life in the most undignified of ways. Dating a very bad guy. It took her life. Having an illicit relationship with him as a woman with children. She betrayed her dignity. I mean, there were a lot of sad circumstances surrounding that. But what I'm saying is dignity has to do with something that's inside. So you just are.
Right.
This is who I am. I can't be any different than this. This is who, and I don't mean by that you don't grow or you don't listen to criticism, but you just say what you see is what you get. And I believe what I believe. And it includes the way you dress. We're in a crisis of modesty today. I don't blame, by the way, my view of modesty is not that women do it for men. They do it for themselves to reflect how Christ looks at them.
So, Unseduced and Unshaken. You wrote that book, it seems like primarily for younger women. That was the audience?
I actually changed it and made it it was suggested that I change it from not young women to just women.
And
because,
then why, keep
go
going.
ahead. Because it includes what you do with your leisure, which transcends all ages. It includes having a sense of voice, which transcends all ages. It includes who you look at models, how you read. And then there are the ones that are more specific, like modesty, although modesty is beginning to transcend all ages. And there is a chapter on sexuality, which would be a little aimed younger. But there were only 2 or 3 chapters that were specific enough to young that I've spoken the lectures in that book dozens of times, and it's been not at all confined to young women.
Why was it on your heart to speak to women primarily when you're talking about dignity?
A lot of people thought that it should be rewritten for men too. Well, the story of the book is I'm not a book writer, and there was a class at Moody by somebody from Moody Press. Paul Sandhouse conducted a class in publishing, and his assignment to his students was to go out and get book contracts. They had to. So this very, very audacious young woman came to me and she started talking to me about writing a book. I said, I'm not interested in writing a book. I'd rather go for coffee. And she said, well, if you did write a book, what would you write about? I said, well, I'd write a C.S. Lewis book, but he already did it. So she went in again and she said, really, what would you write? And I said, well, what I've known best is young women. And I said, I suppose I'd write a book to young women. At the time, I think I was teaching message prep, and I was doing it like a discipleship group as well as a preaching class. I don't know why I said that. Well, she had me by the throat. She literally manipulated me into writing the book. And so I did it, I wrote 6 chapters, and I had Stacy Johnson, Marcus Johnson's wife, write the modesty one. Pam McCrae wrote the one on voice, and one of my really good friends wrote the one on sexuality and on longing. Longing also transcends. And so it just came out that way. So there wasn't like this deliberate plan to write a book on dignity for women.
Yeah, but young women were on your heart.
Yeah, they were on my heart. Yeah.
Because of your relationships with your students, the patterns you were seeing.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about Stephen King. Have you read his novels?
I think I've read, did he do Stand By Me?
He did.
Yes. A former TA of mine wanted me to read that, and I did read it. It was very engaging. I have seen Dolores Claiborne, Misery, The Green Mile, and Carrie, of course, was a movie to see in the 70s. So I've seen a number of his. And Shawshank Redemption, obviously.
Yeah. What's your thought on him?
I think he's a tremendously engaging author. It's on a continuum, the quality of them, of course. Probably the most serious is The Green Mile and the Shawshank Redemption, which really, they're just powerful and moving and dimensional, and you could quote them forever. And then I had a couple of friends who were in abusive relationships, and so I loved Dolores Claiborne because it was like a vengeance movie. I'm not telling you that's a pure-hearted statement.
Yeah. That's like why guys like Tarantino.
Yeah. And Misery is just hilariously awful. You know what I mean? Horrible. Yeah. The ankles, breaking the ankles is just. I just like it was just fun to watch. Yeah.
Do you have any advice to, I mean, I'm sure you have people coming up to you asking you direction in life. When people are trying to figure out what they want to do in life, that could be up until their 50s. I mean, that could be much later in life now, I feel like. And even in the past, I mean, sometimes people really don't know what they want to, quote unquote, do in life for work or vocation until much later. Do you have any advice to people trying to figure that out?
Oh, I think they just need to do a very strong inventory of what they enjoy. What do you really like?
Yeah.
What do you like to do? Like in my retirement, I am retired, but I'm still teaching. What do I really like? I love picking stuff out of alleys and repurposing it. I'm serious. I do it every week. And I stash it, and I paint it, or I give it away, or I find somebody to donate to, or a student. I can't stand waste. And so I just love finding treasures in the alleys. It's ridiculous, but I love it. Okay, say I was much younger. What could I do with that? I think people imagine that their sense of vocation has to be to something huge. You have to do something to make money. And you know what I say to people? You got to make money. Don't be proud about what you do. Especially if you have a family. You can't afford. But what do you really love? If we're not doing what we love part of the time, it's going to be so dried up. I think it's the standard that's set for people that they don't allow themselves to figure out what they like.
Yeah. Why do you think? Do you think they're rushed for time, or they just don't know how to go about it?
I just think that the pressure from the world is big deal kind of stuff. And we're not living in a big deal time. You can't get the jobs you want anymore.
Yeah.
Like there once was.
It's not as easy.
It's not as easy. And you've just got to figure that out and see how that can plug into something either vocationally or avocationally.
But you're kind of saying do what you need to for money, but don't make that what you do for life.
No, don't make that what you do.
I just had a quote I just wanted to run by you real quick and get your reaction to this. This is actually from a German-Korean philosopher, but it's about his book. It's something like The Death of Narrative or Narrative Crisis in the West. But I just found this interesting. So it says, narratives produce the ties that bind us. They create community, eliminate contingency, and anchor us in being. And yet, in our contemporary information society, where everything has become arbitrary and random, storytelling becomes story selling, and narratives lose their binding force. And basically, he's saying, I'll read this last part too. No amount of storytelling could recreate the fire around which humans gather to tell each other stories. That fire has long since burnt out. It has been replaced by the digital screen, which separates people rather than bringing them together. Through storytelling, capitalism appropriates
I think he's making such huge statements there that are far beyond even the idea of storytelling. I think what he's saying is that we've had a failure of community. And that when community comes together, like when I grew up and I had 5 missionary aunts and uncles, 4 in one family, and 4 missionary aunts and uncles, the kids would run all over the lawn catching lightning bugs. My grandmother would sit with my aunts and uncles talking. We'd all then come together. There was this natural engagement of things that, if they're not stories, right, then create stories. That's the stuff of story.
Right.
And the stuff of longing. Well, today, if we no longer have any engagement without a phone in front of us, without watching a series, without being separate rooms doing what we each do on our digital technology, my students tell me all the time, some of them say their mothers never cook a meal. They don't sit down at a table without something that's an interruption. My students don't sit at tables anymore in the cafeteria without the phone there. So we are interrupting the natural course, all the things that we would be saying to each other that create the stories and the funny quotes, and then we don't even have a life that creates the stories. I used to go out in my car, in old cars without phones, long distance traveling. You got to die of something. But if you didn't, there was a chance to have an adventure. Maybe somebody would rescue you and change your tire, or somebody would do your timing belt. You know what I mean? You got off the road. You didn't have a phone to immediately call somebody to come fix it, which then truncates the sense of narrative of life.
Anything you would like to leave us with?
Put the phone down and start creating stories.
Love it. Thank you for your time.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's great.